The cafe had been unusually quiet that morning, the kind of quiet not born of peace, but of tension. A heavy, invisible weight hung in the air, pressing down on the voices of customers and dampening the usual warmth of the space. Conversations were hushed, laughter muted. Even the mechanical hum of the espresso machine seemed more restrained, as though it too understood the gravity of the moment. The reason for this uneasy stillness sat near the window, occupying the best table with a commanding presence that pulled every gaze, whether in curiosity or dread. Richard Carrington. His name alone was enough to shift the atmosphere in any room. A millionaire businessman with a reputation built not on kindness, but on dominance, cruelty, and an explosive temper. In this city, stories about him were passed around like urban legends. Tales of employees reduced to tears, of managers humiliated in full view of customers, and of a barista who had quit on the spot after one scathing complaint. People didn't just dislike him, they feared him. And today, he had chosen this cafe as the stage for his performance. Dressed immaculately in a sharp navy suit, with a tie knotted to perfection, Richard radiated control and cold judgment. He sat tapping his fingers impatiently on the marble tabletop, eyes scanning the room like a hawk seeking flaws. The staff moved quickly but cautiously around him, exchanging nervous glances and silently praying not to draw his ire. When his order finally arrived, his signature double espresso with a dash of cinnamon, it took less than a sip before the inevitable eruption. "This coffee is a disgrace," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the cafe like a thunderclap. The sound of his cup slamming onto its saucer rang out like a warning bell. Conversations halted mid-sentence, forks froze halfway to mouths, and every pair of eyes subtly turned in his direction, some curious, others full of pity. The cafe manager, a slight man with glasses who had suffered through Richard's visits more times than he cared to remember, hurried over with a forced smile and a shaky voice, offering apologies like a man presenting a peace offering to a volcano. But Richard wasn't interested in apologies. His anger was a performance, and he needed an audience. He demanded to know who had made the coffee, who had approved it, and how such an embarrassment had occurred under anyone's watch. His words weren't just critical, they were cruel. Each sentence was a scalpel, slicing away dignity and morale with surgical precision. Behind the counter, the barista responsible, a teenage boy in just his first month on the job, stood frozen, his face pale and hands trembling. It was clear he wanted to disappear. And then, through the stunned silence and palpable fear, someone stepped forward. Her name was Emily. A new waitress, barely a week into the job. She hadn't yet absorbed the cafe's unspoken rule, never draw attention to yourself when Richard Carrington is present. But Emily, unlike the others, didn't flinch or fade into the background. Holding a tray of cappuccinos, she paused only long enough to take a breath before walking toward Richard's table with quiet determination. The entire room watched in disbelief. Other staff members looked on in horror. No one confronted Richard. No one dared. But Emily did. Setting her tray down on a nearby table, she stood tall, her gaze meeting Richard's with calm resolve. Her voice was steady, free of fear or anger, as she told him, plainly, respectfully, that the way he was speaking to the staff was unacceptable. A stunned silence swept the room. Even Richard, momentarily caught off guard, blinked in disbelief. No one had ever challenged him like that. Not here. Not in years. His expression darkened, and for a moment it seemed he would explode in one of his legendary tirades. But Emily held her ground. She didn't back down or raise her voice. She simply reminded him, with the quiet strength of someone who believes in what they're saying, that every cup of coffee is made by someone trying their best. That mistakes are human. That dignity isn't something reserved for the rich and powerful, it's something everyone deserves. She told him, not with bitterness but with honesty, that his words reflected far more about his character than the coffee ever could. Her tone didn't accuse. It didn't shame. It revealed. And in that moment, something shifted. Richard, red-faced and furious, said nothing. Her words, soft, clear, unwavering, had cut through his armor in a way no apology or flattery ever could. Around the cafe, customers who had moments before shrunk away now watched Emily with admiration, all written across their faces. Sometimes, courage doesn't roar. Sometimes, it stands quietly in front of a storm and says, "This is enough." The cafe had been unusually quiet that morning, the kind of silence that doesn't come from calm, but from fear. It was the kind of hush that settles when something is wrong, when everyone is holding their breath without knowing it. Customers whispered instead of chatting, and the usual clinks of cutlery and bursts of laughter were notably absent. Even the steady hum of the espresso machine seemed restrained, as if it, too, was aware of the presence that loomed over the room. At the best table by the window sat Richard Carrington, a man whose name carried weight in the city, sometimes with admiration, but more often with dread. A millionaire businessman, Richard was known not for his success or vision, but for his temper, arrogance, and unforgiving standards. His reputation had preceded him. Stories were told of him making employees cry, humiliating managers in front of customers, and sending a barista packing with a single venomous complaint. His presence felt like a storm cloud that darkened the room, heavy and unpredictable. That morning, the storm was brewing. Dressed in a tailored navy suit with a tie so perfectly knotted it looked sculpted, Richard tapped his fingers against the marble table in growing irritation. His eyes scanned the room with hawk-like intensity, waiting to pounce on any sign of incompetence. When his order arrived, a double espresso with a dash of cinnamon, it took less than a sip before his voice echoed across the cafe. "This coffee is a disgrace," he barked, slamming the cup down so hard the saucer rattled. Conversation ceased, forks hovered midair, and every head turned in his direction. The manager, a nervous man in glasses who had handled more of Richard's wrath than he'd cared to admit, rushed over with an apologetic smile and a voice barely steady. But apologies weren't what Richard wanted. He wanted someone to blame. He demanded to know who made the coffee, who approved it, and why the standards had sunk so low. His words sliced through the air, dripping with cruelty, designed to shame and diminish. Behind the counter, the young barista, a boy barely a month into the job, stood frozen in terror, too afraid to speak.